Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. We'll give it about 1 minute to let people get into our webinar tonight. Tonight, the webinar is on increasing chapter visibility with a Paint the Plow community event. If you're not part of an Isaac Walton League chapter, that's okay. This webinar is really for anyone interested in getting involved in a Paint the Plow event or starting a Paint the Plow event for their community. So for those of you who have joined us already, if you could put in the chat, if you are part of an Isaac Walton League chapter, we'd love to know what chapter you're a member of. But if you're not part of an Isaac Walton League chapter, that's totally okay. Just please put in the chat or even in the Q&A if the chat's not working for you, what organization you are part of and if you are thinking about doing a Paint the Plow event with your organization. So again, as you're tuning in, we'll give it about 1 more minute for people to show up. Sam just put in the chat there. Please let us know what organization you're with, if you're with one of our Isaac Walton League chapters, or if you're with another organization that you're thinking about doing a Paint the Plow event. So please put those in the chat. The webinar tonight is going to be recorded and it'll be available on our website after the webinar today. And as we're going along, if you have any questions, please put those in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll try to answer those at the end of the webinar and maybe even throughout as well. So tonight we're going to talk about painting plows, which is a really exciting project that we actually got to do this fall. So let's go ahead and get started. So we'll go through quite a few agenda items tonight, talk a little bit about road salt pollution, some goals of the Salt Watch program, getting started with Paint the Plow, materials you might need, the whole planning and painting process, cleanup, and possible slogans as well, and then liability forms at the very end. If you would like to follow along, we do have a very cool PDF that you can print out or see online. Sam will put the link here in the chat, how to run a successful Paint the Plow event. So I'll basically be going through this as we're talking here today for this webinar. And I do apologize that a lot of this webinar, it is very text heavy, so I'll do my best to read some of the text for those of you who might be tuning in on smaller screens tonight. But there are some pictures at the end that you'll certainly get to see. So as many of you know, in 2017, there was a really large road salt spill outside of our national office headquarters in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And this salt spill was directly on top of a storm drain that led down to a local waterway, the Muddy Branch, which is a water source, a drinking water source for millions of Americans once it leads into the Potomac River. And one of our clean water fellows at the time was testing the local waterway below. And basically overnight after this spill happened, the chloride levels in the waterway, chloride is a common component of road salt. Those levels went from about 30 parts per million to above the level of the strips that we could read. So over about 630 parts per million. So really high levels of chloride. It would be considered definitely chronically toxic to our freshwater aquatic life, and it might even be acutely toxic or instantly toxic to that freshwater life. With this salt spill, we didn't really know who to call to get this spill cleaned up, or even whose jurisdiction this spill was even in. Was it in the jurisdiction of the state? Was it the county? Was it the city? Was it a private applicator? Who is responsible for when spills like this occur? So after making a number of phone calls, finally the spill was cleaned up. But as we mentioned, unfortunately, the damage to the stream below was already done. So as a result of this, we launched the Salt Watch program in 2018. And it's a community science monitoring program to monitor local waterways for road salt pollution. And I wanted to leave this graphic with you. It only takes 1 teaspoon of salt to permanently pollute 5 gallons of water. And there's really no feasible way to remove road salt once it enters the environment. And really only just a little bit of salt goes a really long way in keeping us safe in the winter. So A little bit of salt also does a big job of polluting water. So trying to reduce the amount of salt that we're putting in the environment is key. But again, we need to be safe as well during the winter time. There are a number of impacts that road salt has in the environment and even with our own health. So wildlife can be impacted, especially freshwater aquatic life. A lot of those sort of stream bugs and fish and other organisms that are living in freshwater ecosystems, they might not be used to sort of any salt that's in the water. They're used to freshwater streams, not salty waters. Road salt also has a lot of infrastructure impacts. It can be very corrosive to our concrete, our pavement, blacktop, anything like that, as well as our pipes, our vehicles, so many things it can sort of corrode and break down. It also can be very impactful in our drinking water, not just from the pipe perspective, but also the most commonly used road salt we have is sodium chloride. And unfortunately, most wastewater treatment facilities, they don't have enough funding or the proper equipment to be able to remove sodium or chloride from the water. And so that ends up in our drinking water as a result. And unfortunately for folks who are on especially really low sodium diets, they might not realize that they're getting additional sodium from their drinking water. So that can be a really big problem as well. A lot of the habitats within environments can be impacted, especially plants. They're not used to salt being put on top of them during the winter time or maybe from runoff throughout the summer even. And so a lot of those plants, they might dry up or even desiccate as a result of that salt sort of overspray from sidewalks and things. And then of course our pets, many pets, they don't like walking on salt in the winter time, and it can be very irritating to their feet. If they ingest it, they can get sick. So lots of problems that salt can cause, lots of different impacts. And there are a couple of different ways to apply road salt. So rock salt is a common application. It's those sort of chunks of salt that you might see sort of coming off of the back of a truck. They do sometimes tend to bounce or get kicked off of sidewalks or roadways by people or by vehicles moving about. And it's very concentrated, that rock salt. There's also brine applications as well. This is when you're seeing lines being sprayed on the roadways. It's actually a salt water mixture, so it's much less concentrated than those chunks of rock salt. It sticks to the surface of the roadway and it creates a very nice barrier between the surface of the roadway and any precipitation that is occurring. And it also can't get kicked off like rock salt can. So anytime that you're seeing those lines on the roads, we really love the lines because it's one way you know that your Department of Transportation or private road salt applicator, they're trying to reduce the amount of road salt that they're putting into the environment, but they're still trying to maintain safety. So one really good thing to see when you're out and about during the winter time in northern climates. And I wanted to throw this picture on here too, or these two pictures. The image you see on the left, that is a lot of salt that has been applied, whereas on the right, there's really not that much salt. There's a lot of misconceptions about how much road salt you need to apply. More salt does not mean more melting, and you really shouldn't feel that crunch underfoot during the winter time as you're walking around either. Those are sort of two indicators that maybe there's a little bit too much salt that's being applied. Really, a 12-ounce mug or your sort of typical coffee mug holds enough salt to salt a 20-foot long driveway or about 10 sidewalk squares, which is about 2 parking spaces. So you don't need to go out and measure between each granule, but there should be about 3 inches of space between each granule of salt that you're putting down. Or if you're applying something like brine, there should still be lines or space between those lines as they're being applied, just so the salt can work most effectively. And for the Salt Watch program itself, there are a number of goals that we have. We want to raise awareness in the general public about the connection between salt and stream health, to identify chloride hotspots in freshwater, and to advocate for smarter salt application of road salt by sharing some of our results with private landowners and local and state agencies. And the Paint the Plow project, it works in really well with our goals to raise awareness, especially of road salt within the environment. So now the moment you've all been waiting for, let's get into Paint the Plow. And again, if you haven't looked at this document yet that Sam put in the chat, how to run a successful Paint the Plow event, definitely check that out. And we'll sort of be going through that document today as well. So the concept, what is Salt Watch Paint the Plow and what is the purpose? So Paint the Plow is a community outreach event that encourages groups to work with their local Department of Transportation to paint snowplow blades or a snowplow blade with original artwork centered around smart road salting practices, really best practices within road salting. And the program aims to raise awareness around the issue of road salt pollution and highlight the important and difficult work of the DOTs, the Departments of Transportation, to maintain safety while protecting the environment. And I think that's a really key point here. The Departments of Transportation and really any road salt applicator, they do not have an easy job. They need to make sure that everybody is being safe during the winter time. But also they need to protect the environment. And again, safety is really key. So sometimes they might apply additional salt because of that, which we don't love to see, but we realize that people need to stay safe. And so as a result of this program, the painted snowplow blades, they really do enhance public awareness of road salt use, clean water, and the connection between road salt application and drinking water as well. And that sometimes depends on what artwork is being applied to those plows. This is one of my favorite images that I took during our pilot training, or pilot event rather. Clean water, safe roads, we shouldn't have to choose. And this was sort of a slogan that one of our schools put onto their snowplow, which was really great. We really shouldn't have to choose during the winter time. We should have both clean water and safe roads. And I did want to mention, I'll reference this throughout the webinar today, but we did have sort of a pilot program this last fall in 2023. And we actually we teamed up with our local Department of Transportation, our county Department of Transportation, and we were able to get 11 snowplow blades that we sent to partner organizations, Isaac Walton League chapters, scout troops, and schools as well to paint smart salt messaging on the snowplows. And we'll show you some of those photos throughout, but mostly at the end as well. But through this process, there are sort of some key things that you need to especially get started. So partners is huge. Why not get more partners involved in Paint the Plow? A key partner with this is your Department of Transportation, or maybe someone just with a snowplow blade. It doesn't have to be limited to Departments of Transportation, but it can also be maybe a private for-hire road salt applicator who's interested in doing smart salting practices. Maybe they'd be willing to sort of donate a plow blade for this, and then obviously use it during the winter time. Volunteers are key. A lot of those people are going to be your painters. And throughout this process, you'll also need a coordinator like me for our process to really coordinate between different groups. And then of course, funding as well is really big for this project. So we'll go through this. So again, key partners, the Department of Transportation, or whoever is going to be supplying those snowplow blades for you. And then people that you want to get involved. Do you just want to keep it within your organization and have volunteers be organization members? Or do you want to invite the public or maybe some school groups or maybe other people like art teachers and things to paint the plows as well? Things to think about. Here's one of the pictures of one of our schools as they're sort of in the middle of painting. You also do want to make sure that there's some sort of point person for the Paint the Plow project. So this person would be your coordinator to make sure that you're managing funding for supplies and ordering materials, being the point person of communication between the Department of Transportation or DOT and your organization, coordinate those volunteers, make sure people are showing up for those painting times that you might have. And then also for advertising the event, whether that's sort of within your organization or if it's part of sort of a bigger event as well, maybe outside of your organization. And then, of course, funding. So expect supplies to cost between $300 to $500 per snowplow. And some of the items that we'll list sort of throughout this webinar, some of those things can be donated, but we do recommend purchasing sort of additional paintbrushes, maybe more than you have. And then it's always good, I think, for an art project to start off with some fresh paint. So I would recommend ordering paint as well for this. And of course, materials. So this is what we'll get into. Make sure you also have a safe place to store materials before, during, and sort of after this project as well. Ideally, it'll be in a well-ventilated space. What we have here in this picture is me in my office with materials for 11 snowplows. So a lot of materials, plus some extras just in case we needed some additional supplies. So making sure that maybe that area that you're storing the materials in is also climate controlled, just to make sure that the paint and things don't get either too hot or too cold during the process. And there are a number of materials that you will need. So primer to sort of start the plow off on a nice slate. Paint. We just gave participants primary colors as well as black and white, so then they could mix their own colors together. A tarp is really key. Brushes, lots of brushes. Mixing containers and a paint tray. The paint tray especially comes in handy for the priming portion, stenciling materials, and also a paint can opener. For our materials, there's a whole list of some equipment needed. I don't know if you can see my screen or not, but but lots of different materials. On our document that we have supplied, we actually got all of our materials from Home Depot, and I do have a shopping list that is linked in the document. So if you look at that document online, you can click on the link to the shopping list and it'll give you everything that we purchased. Please keep in mind though that some of the items that might be out of stock, they might not be on that shopping list. But we do have links or URLs to everything that we used. For the paint, both the primer and the colored paint that we used, it was all oil-based paint. You can also use water-based paint. There are two reasons why we decided to use oil-based paint. The first reason was that we are painting outside and you're sort of open to a number of weather events that could occur while you're doing an art project outside. And so that oil-based paint, it really stayed on the plows much better than I think water-based paint would have if we did have a really big storm going through, even though the plows, of course, are covered. And the other reason is because it's sticking onto metal, and the oil-based paint seemed to stick a little bit better than water-based paint as well. But keep in mind that oil-based paint, and I'll go over this in a little bit, it is really hard to get off of your skin, and it's pretty much permanently on clothes if you get it on clothes as well. So making sure that participants are adequately covered with gloves and smocks and things as well. And the tarp is really key with this as well. You want to make sure that it is being placed down before the plow even gets there. So then the plow blade can go directly on top of the tarp. And you can actually use the tarp then to cover the plow during weather events, but also the tarp, make sure that there's no permanent paint that gets onto different surfaces that the plow is on. We also do have some recommended materials. I mentioned smocks or ponchos and disposable gloves, just making sure that your volunteers who are painting are adequately covered. They're wearing maybe old clothes underneath of all of that, just so they don't get any paint on some clothes that they don't want paint on. We also recommend sponge brushes and just so many small brushes. A good variety, different sizes of brushes really goes a long way for this project as well. And then some optional materials. So we used clear coat at the very end of the project for two reasons. One, gloss paint was what was more readily available for our primer and colored paint that we used. And so it wasn't very photo friendly. So we used a matte clear coat at the very end to try to take a little bit less sort of glossy pictures. And then the other reason we used clear coat was to just try to keep that design on the plow for a little bit longer, but realizing that the plows are going to get beaten up during this the winter season as they're being used. Knee pads can be really important because there's really no way to lift up the plow blade. So everybody is really going to be on their hands and knees while painting. It's not the most comfortable position, but if you do have some sort of padding, that does make it a little bit easier. No matter who you are during the painting process. And then we did supply some hand cleaner. We used Gojo's, which is sort of an abrasive hand cleaner. But again, since we used oil-based paint, it didn't really help that much to get the paint off of people's hands. And then for people who really want to save your brushes after this project, we do recommend a brush cleaner like mineral spirits, some sort of solvent. And then you'd need some sort of cleaning bucket that's metal for that, and ideally comes with a lid too. But I think everyone who participated in our pilot, they ended up throwing away brushes at the very end, just because it is not the easiest thing to get the oil-based paint off of those brushes as well. One more note on brushes with this too. During the painting process, it is helpful to sort of wrap brushes in some sort of plastic and stick them in the freezer if you are using oil-based paint, and then the brushes won't get hard throughout the process too. So just one more note there, and that is in our PDF. So some planning, we'll go through sort of the scope of the project, the Department of Transportation contact, purchasing materials, and then also designs as well. So scope of the project, really how big do you want this project to be? Who do you want involved in the project? Those sorts of questions. We do recommend, if this is the first time that you have done a Paint the Plow event, the maximum number of plows you should probably paint is 3, and I would highly recommend just starting with 1 plow. We allocated quite a bit of time for this project, and we actually ended up going over time as far as coordination time for Paint the Plow. It was much more involved than we thought as we were going into it. So it can quickly become its own sort of full-time job doing this project. So make sure that the maximum plows you're painting at one time is going to be 3 if you're just getting started. And then if you want to get the general public involved, make sure that that's being advertised to people, and think about it ahead of time. Is this something that you're going to want those plows to be maybe moved after painting and then displayed at a public event, or even painted at a public event? These are some questions that you might want to keep in mind. And then a Department of Transportation contact. Make sure that you get in contact with someone with your local Department of Transportation or your DOT. The contact that we had was actually the division chief of highway services. So someone with maybe a similar title might be a good person to get in contact with, but it doesn't hurt to start with somebody that you know maybe, and then sort of go up the chain to find that right person for this event. And some states and counties already do have sort of Paint the Plow events. They might be something like naming contests for schools or something like that, but it doesn't hurt to ask if that's something that you can do with your organization. You might just have to do sort of additional liability forms, and we'll talk about that at the end. And timing. So I do recommend, once you find your Department of Transportation contact, get in contact with them months. And by months, I don't mean like a couple months. I mean like 6 months to a year in advance of this event. The Departments of Transportation, they are so busy throughout the year doing just a smorgasbord of different things. So make sure that this is on their sort of agenda, something that they're aware of that you want to have happen. And as far as timing as well, from our experience, most snowplow blades, they can be acquired somewhere between like May to September for painting. And we gave participants 2 weeks to paint, but the DOTs, they will need those snowplows back during the winter time. And usually they start sort of calibrating equipment and things in October. So ask them what that drop off date needs to be. When is the last what is the last day that we can be painting on this snowplow? But again, you'll only have that snowplow for 2 weeks. So don't sort of be a hog of their time or anything. Just give them, I want a snowplow from these 2 weeks. This is our this is our drop off date. This is our pick up date, and get that snowplow and paint for 2 weeks. And we estimated that each snowplow takes about 3 to 12 hours to paint. And this is not including drying time. So probably at least 3 painting sessions, but 3 to 12 hours to paint, depending on how intricate your design is and how experienced some of the members of your team are as well. And materials, something that we ran into is make sure that you purchase your materials well in advance. We did sort of 2 orders of materials, and the second time we went to order, a lot of our materials were actually back ordered for a number of months. So make sure that you have those supplies well before you need them, just so you're all ready and sort of set to hit the ground running once painting actually happens. And something else too, make sure that your designs are drafted in advance. You want to make sure that any sort of messaging that you're putting on the snowplows, it doesn't have any like completely anti-salt or anti-Department of Transportation messaging, because this is a partnership that you have with the DOT. They're trying to do their best by reducing the amount of road salt pollution in the environment. But also they have to keep safety in mind. So keep those things in mind as you're coming up with a design. And it is not a bad idea to get that design approved by the Department of Transportation even before they have the snowplow dropped off for you as well. Just so if you need to sort of pivot and change your design, you'll have some time to do that. And once you get the snowplow, you'll be ready to paint and you know exactly what you will be painting. Another note on designs too, it's not a bad idea to check with your Department of Transportation. So most of the design is going to go on the front of the snowplow blade. But I know some of our partners, they wanted to paint some smaller designs on the back of the snowplow blade. So make sure to check with the DOT that it's okay to do that. And then also I'll show you a picture here in a little bit. There's a reflector at the top of the snowplow. Sometimes the Departments of Transportation take those reflectors off. It's sort of like a foot long rubber piece that goes across the top of the snowplow blade. Ask and see if you can take those off to paint, or if that's something that you can paint. If you do take it off to paint, or they've taken it off to paint, note that at least like the top foot of your design is going to get covered by that reflector. So keep that in mind as you're coming up with your design as well. So the painting process, we'll go through sort of the setup and drop off, priming, stenciling, painting, and then also cleanup. So setup and drop off, some things to keep in mind with this. The snowplow blades that we painted, they were about 10.5 feet long, but they can be up to 12 feet in length, and they're about 3.5 to 4 feet tall. And when I say snowplow blade, I mean actually like the blade in front of the snowplow, the thing that's sort of pushing all of that ice and snow off of the roadways. And in a lot of cases, they will not leave the truck there. They will just leave the snowplow blade. And so making sure that it's in a really flat, safe place, it's not on dirt or grass, it's on like concrete, pavement, something like that. Make sure that it's stable and upright and will not move. Some of them have sort of like their own hydraulics, so they'll just stand there in place. Others might have to have something wedged underneath of them to make sure that they're upright, and just really make sure that the snowplow blades are in a safe location as well, that they're not going to get vandalized when people aren't around. And another thing to keep in mind for sort of the drop-off of the snowplow blade, make sure that wherever you have in mind to have the snowplow blade dropped off, it's in a location that is navigable by like a huge dump truck. You want to make sure that it's not sort of down like a back alley or anything. Make sure that something that is about 12 feet wide can get through. And then also back out of or go around to another place. And the snowplow blades are really heavy. They're thousands of pounds. So don't think that you're gonna just move it to another location. Wherever they drop that snowplow blade, that's where it's gonna live until they pick it up. And so with the drop off, make sure that that tarp is down ahead of time. We do recommend somebody is on site during the drop off just to make sure everything looks good. If you can see where we have them setting the snowplow blade in this photo, it's sort of at the edge of the tarp. And then you can actually flip the tarp over sort of the front of that snowplow blade so then it can be covered during any weather events or maybe between paintings so people don't get very curious on what's happening. So again, make sure that tarp is down before they even come with the truck and make sure that somebody is there to direct the truck driver or to answer any questions if the truck gets lost, things like that. This is the picture of that reflector. So some of our participants, some of the snowplow blades had the reflectors on them, some of them were taken off. And so ask again to see if you can paint that reflector or make sure that your design is going to be sort of below the reflector. So then once the reflector is on, you can still see your design really well. And then of course, the painting process. Make sure that appropriate clothing is worn for painting. It's going to get covered in paint if you aren't wearing smocks or being careful, things like that. So just don't wear your favorite clothes, or if they are your favorite clothes, then it's totally okay for them to get some paint on them. And then make sure that you're following instructions on the paint cans as well. Different things have different drying times, so make sure that you're not trying to rush through priming to painting. Make sure things have time to dry in between. And one more note on this too for the painting process. Expect that there will be between like 2 to 4 people painting or able to paint at one time. Again, the plows themselves are somewhere in the realm of 10 feet wide. And so you can only fit so many people, especially adults. Kids, you might be able to fit a couple more children painting all at once. So first things first is priming the plow. So make sure that your primer is mixed up really well and ready to go. We used a roller and roller brush and a paint mixers and things and a paint tray to cover most of the plows with our white primer. And I only used 1 coat of paint for priming the plow. This is one that I primed, and we only used about 1 quart of primer. You might have to do a 2nd coat of paint depending on sort of how beaten up the plow is when it gets to you, and then also how thick your coat is. So mostly used a roller brush for this, but then we also used another brush, maybe a wedge brush or something, to do any of the rough edges or to paint some of the areas that aren't as flat that we could have hit with the roller. So priming is first, and then stenciling on those designs. You can use things like painter's tape and pencils and Sharpies to really help you with this step. And some groups with stenciling actually used a projector, like Little Falls Watershed Alliance here. And they are able to get a really cool design onto their plow just by projecting that. So think outside the box for this project. It's pretty cool. And then of course, painting, make sure that all of your colors are mixed for whatever colors you want for your designs, and cover the plow again between painting sessions and try to take pictures of the process because you get some really cool pictures of sort of the steps that you're taking throughout this painting process. And then again, if desired, you can spray the final product with a clear coat to sort of save your design a little bit more. But make sure that if you are using Sharpie, that you're not using Sharpie as sort of a line at the end, that you're covering up your Sharpie with paint. We did have one plow that I think oversprayed a little bit with the clear coat, and some of their Sharpie ended up running down their plow. So make sure you're not using Sharpies as sort of its own color, that you're using paint for that. And one other thing too, handprints. If you wanted to do any handprints, we had a couple of groups use handprints. We had participants put gloves on, and then we just brushed on some of the paint onto their hand. We do not recommend dipping your hand in paint because it's just way too much paint. So lightly brushing on whatever colors that you wanted on those hands, and then putting the handprint on. But again, use gloves for that process, especially if you're using oil-based paint. And of course, cleanup. So make a plan for disposal of items after the event. Many items like brushes, they might not be really easily cleaned. So make sure that they're properly disposed of after the event. And then things like leftover paint, they can be used for other projects, as can the tarp and paint tray and roller frame and things. But if you can't, or maybe you're pretty much have an empty can of paint, you can actually open the cans, crack them open in a well-ventilated area, make sure that no critters can get into them, to let that paint dry, and then you can take those cans in for proper disposal. There are a number of possible slogans. We have more examples in our PDF, but here's just a couple ideas of things that might help you get started, or thinking through the process of things that you could put on a plow. But again, the sky's the limit as far as what you can put on the plow, as far as smart salting, watershed art, all sorts of things. So just a sprinkle will do. Stop over salting, be smart salt, love the lines, hold the salt, keep it fresh. Shovel, scatter, sweep, repeat. And of course, there's so many more that you can put on there. And sort of last but not least, permission slips and liability waivers. So for our project, we had a couple different permission slips and liability waivers. For individuals, we worked with schools. So some of the permission slips were sent home. That's the picture that's on the very left, where parents could sign. And then we had some plows that were at public events being painted. And so we had people sort of print out their name in more of like a grid. Similar language for both of them. I would highly recommend that anyone who is involved in painting sign a liability waiver and photo release, especially if you are taking photos. And then keep those waivers for however long you need to keep them, just to be safe, to cover all of your bases. And then we also end up creating another liability waiver for limited property damage, just because not all of the plows were on county property the entire time. So some of the plows, like going to our scout troops or Isaac Walton League chapters or national office headquarters, those plows were leaving county property to stay there. And so we want to make sure that all parties are held harmless for any damages that might have occurred during that. We have given some sample liability forms in our packet, but please consult with an attorney when creating your own permission slips and liability forms, just because these are certainly not one size fits all as far as liability forms go. And if you have any questions about that, we're more than happy to answer those as well. So just to sort of end our presentation tonight, and again, if you have questions, please put those in the chat or Q&A, and we're more than happy to answer them. These are some of the plows that we painted or took pictures of our volunteers painting throughout the process. Again, we had 11, so there's a few that aren't on this slide here, but lots of really cool ideas. And it was a really, really fun project. It was quite a bit of time, but I think the end, we really enjoyed the outcome. And it was very successful from the people who participated as well. So please salt responsibly. If you have any questions, please visit our website at saltwatch.org. You can also find the link to the PDF if you go to saltwatch.org and then on our What You Can Do page under chapter resources. So scroll down the page quite a bit and you can actually find the PDF on how to run a successful Paint the Plow event. But please also, if you have questions, you can email us at saltwatch.org. Saltwatch@iwla.org. So if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer those at this time. I know it's a lot of information, but I wanted to give you sort of all of the tools that we had and some of the lessons learned that we had throughout our process. And I'm really happy that there's a number of people from quite a few different chapters as well here on the webinar tonight. Okay, so if there's no questions, please feel free to email us at saltwatch@iwla.org. Again, go get that PDF, How to Run a Successful Paint the Plow event. It's on our website. Go to saltwatch.org and it's under the What You Can Do page under chapter resources. And again, this project is something that you don't have to be part of an Isaac Walton League chapter to do. You can even be part of a school. There's lots of departments of transportation that are doing Paint the Plow events with schools as well. So thank you so much for attending tonight. And again, this webinar has been recorded, so the recording will be available on our website, I think probably tomorrow as well. So thank you so much, and I hope that you have a great night, and we're hoping to see some more awesome plows out there, maybe within the next couple of years. So thank you so much.